Hey everybody, this is Dan the Chess Enthusiast. I'm here looking at another game that I played. I chose this game because in it I was able to play the Traxler Counterattack, which is a very aggressive play from black. I suggest you check out the video from the chess website by following the link in the sidebar to this video. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody that I look at these games without the use of any chess engines. All of the lines are lines that I come up with by myself. And I also want to say that for this game, I was able to come up with many lines, but because of the time constraints on YouTube, I'm only going to go through the ones that I feel are the best or involve best play from either side. So let's get started. My opponent opens the game with e4, pawn e5, bishop c4, knight c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight to g5, putting pressure on the f7 pawn, bishop to c5, knight captures on f7, forking the queen and the rook, and my king cannot recapture because of the bishop on c4. From here, bishop captures on f2, checking the king. King captures on f2, knight captures on f4, delivers check, and with the tempo from the check, I'm able to save my queen on the next move. King goes to e2, and from here I decided to put my queen onto h4. I didn't want to put it onto f6 because if the rook comes over to f1, then I start losing tempos, and in the Traxler counterattack, you want to attack. You do not want to lose tempos or anything like that. So my opponent played queen to f1, and from here I played a very weak move. I played d6. At the time, I was thinking of liberating my bishop on c8 and letting it get into the game. I was not worried about the setup from the queen, the bishop, and the knight because I knew that my king had enough escape squares and that I had enough pieces in the vicinity to ward off any attack. However, I think in this position, a much stronger move would have been knight to d4, checking the king. In this position, white has to be very careful. If the king plays to d1, the end of the game is going to come about very quickly. What can happen is the knight can check on f2, the king can play to e1, double check on the king, and the king has to play back to d1. From here, queen check on g4 pretty much seals the deal. The only way to avoid checkmate in this position is by sacrificing the queen, playing to f3. The knight can capture the queen, and the knight actually cannot be recaptured, because if it is, then we have checkmate. So going to d1 in this position is a very big mistake. What about going to d3? From here, the knight can hit the check on c5, and the best move for the white king in this position actually is to play back to e3. I was not able to find a knockout punch in this position from black, but the play that I did come up with was queen over to e4, checking the king goes to f2, and then the rook comes over to f8. This is a very messy position for white. The knight is currently pinned to the king, and I'm getting ready to thrust forward with the d-pawn to d5, which would sever the connection between this knight and its protector, the bishop. Like I said, this is just a very messy position for white. That is if the king goes to e3 from this position. Going to c3 is actually a very big mistake. What I can do from here is the knight can come to e2 and hit a check. Yes, the knight is being sacrificed, but I'm opening up the fourth rank since the king is confined right now to just third rank. Opening up the fourth rank for access for the black queen is, I think, very prudent in this position. So the queen can capture on e2, queen check on d4, the king can go to b4, and then we have a5 check. From here, there are two possible moves, and both of them are losing. If the king plays to b5, then we have c6 check. The king can only go to b6, and then from here we have a discovered checkmate. Notice that the knight is covering the escape square on c7. That's if the king plays to b5. If the king plays to a3, we still have checkmate. It just takes a little while longer. From here, we can push the pawn to b5. If the bishop moves anywhere, the queen will be allowed to get to b4, and then that will be checkmate. Alternatively, white can opt to try to force a queen exchange, but notice that after the queens are exchanged, pawn to b4 is checkmate. So that is why in this position, if we go back here, in this position, knight to d4 is a very strong move. However, like I said, I missed it, and in the game I played d6, and play continued as follows. The knight captures on d6, checking the king. I recapture the knight. The queen comes down and hits check on f7. I just pull the king over to d8, and the queen captures on g7, attacking the unprotected rook. From here, now I hit the check on d4. The king goes to d3. I hit another check with knight to f2. King goes to c3. And I play knight to b4. Again, I'm just trying to open up the fourth rank completely for my queen's access. From here, in the game, the bishop captures on b5, but there was another move that white could have played in this position. Let's say the king goes to b3. From here, what I was able to come up with was knight check on d4, king goes back to c3, and then b5. This is trying to make the bishop flinch. If the bishop plays to somewhere, let's say f7, then we have checkmate very quickly. We have knight to e2 check, king goes over to b3, and queen to a4 is checkmate. And if in this position the bishop plays to, let's say, f1, the knight can still check on e2, the bishop can recapture, the queen can come to d4, check the king, king go to b3, the bishop comes out to e6, checks the king again, the bishop can block on c4, but then we have checkmate. And finally, if in this position white starts to get greedy for material, the queen can capture on h8, the king can go to d7, queen g7 check, king can go to g6, and now the queen can no longer attack the black king. The bishop can capture on b5, but the knight can recapture on b5. The king has to go to b3, bishop goes to e6, and from here we have checkmate. So that is what happens if in this position the king goes to b3. However, as I said in the game, bishop captured on b5. From here, the queen delivered a check on d4, forced the king to b3. The bishop comes out on to e6 and checks the king. Again, from this position, the king actually went into the corner. But actually, there was another move that white could have played that I looked at, and that was if the pawn blocked on c4. From here, what I was able to come up with was the following. Queen checks on d3. The king can go to a4, and from here I can play a6. What this is doing is attacking the bishop on b5, and if the queen plays to h8 and again tries to just capture as much material as possible, the king can go to c7, the queen can capture the other rook, but from here we have a check. The king can recapture, the queen can capture on c4, king goes over to a5, and that's checkmate. That is one variation that I looked at. Another variation was if the queen plays to f6, forking the king and the bishop, trying to capture the unprotected bishop. The king can go to c7, queen captures on e6, but then the pawn captures the bishop on b5, king captures the pawn, then we have a rook lift to a6. The queen can try to check the black king. The black king can just play to b8. And in this position, the best move actually for white that I was able to find was if it plays to b4. The other variations that I looked at led to a quicker checkmate. From here, we can play rook over to c8, putting pressure on the pawn on c4. White can try to protect that pawn by playing queen to e6, but we can just lift the rook to c6. Queen can hit a check on the king. King can go to a7. The knight can play out to a3, thinking of protecting the pawn on c4 and of interposing on b5 if one of the rooks checks. But from here, actually, the rook can capture the knight. If the rook is recaptured, then we have checkmate very quickly. So that is what happens if, in this position, we have a pawn block on c4. However, like I said, in the game, the king played over to a3. And from here, I was able to continue by playing pawn to a5, which is giving my queen a checkmate square on b4. Now in the game, the queen decided to capture as much material as possible. Captured on h8, king goes to c7, queen check on g7, king to b6. And from here, it was pretty much game over. In the game, my opponent resigned himself to the loss and played knight to c3, after which I hit the checkmate. However, there was one more variation that I wanted to look at. If the pawn comes to c3, attacking the queen and protecting the checkmate square on b4, we can have queen to c5 hitting a check. The king can go to a4. Queen captures on b5, hits another check. The king can go back to a3. And from here, we have a very quiet move, but a very powerful move, which is knight to d3. And from here, there's nothing that white is going to be able to do that will stop a checkmate. The white can try something like queen to f6, attacking the unprotected bishop. But from here, actually, after a queen sacrifice on b4, we have checkmate. So those were all the variations that I chose to cover in this video. Again, there were many more that I did not cover just because of the time constraints, and I apologize for that. But if you have any questions or comments, those are welcomed, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks. Bye.